Another point that Dr. Jerry Walls made is that hell, the traditional model of hell, has always been a teaching from the beginning of Christ to today. It's been a teaching of the church. That's simply not true. The early church did not teach the kind of concept of hell that the church taught in the Dark Ages, nor in the Reformation, nor in modern contemporary evangelicalism. This teaching of hell that we have today, where did it come from? It originated from senators, Roman senators and Greek senators and Egyptian princes and kings who used the concept of everlasting punishment on the other side of the grave to hold people in check. They used it as a means of power to hold people in fear and to keep them in ignorance. And on the Tentmaker website and on the whatthehellishell.com website, you'll see the URLs for that on the screen there. If you go to those sources, you'll discover several quotes from the early ancient philosophers and poets, and they will tell you who invented the concept of hell. Powerful men using the concept of fear to hold people in check. They are the ones who invented the concept of hell. The early Jews, the Jews of the Bible, they never taught it. You'll never find hell in the Old Testament in any new translations today. And the early church fathers didn't teach it, and neither did Jesus or his apostles. Now, I'm going to quote from some Orthodox church historians, and out of their own mouth, they will tell you what the early church taught. This comes from a booklet that I wrote, The Early Christian View of the Savior, and I'll quote a few traditional historians and scholars, and you decide from their own words what the early church taught. The great historian Giesler writes, "The belief in the inalienable capacity of improvement in all rational beings and the limited duration of future punishment was so general even in the West and among the opponents of Origen that it seems entirely independent of his system." You see, Origen is accused very often by traditional theologians as the inventor of apokatastasis, that is the restoration of all things. You're going to find out that Origen was not the inventor of it, that his teachers taught it, and they learned it from the apostles, and they learned it from Paul, and they learned it from the prophets of the Old Testament. They didn't get this concept from paganism. Pagans taught eternal torment. The Jews did not teach eternal torment, and the early Christians who were Jews, they didn't teach eternal torment and hell either. The German theologian and historian Johann Christoph Dödeling writes, "In proportion as any man was eminent in learning in Christian antiquity, the more did he cherish and defend the hope of the termination of future torments." Professor and historian Henry McNutt Oxenham informs us that the doctrine of endless punishment was not believed at all by some of the holiest and earliest of the fathers, and was not taught as an integral part of the Christian faith by any, even of those who believed it as an opinion. Historian Paff says, "The ultimate restoration of the lost was an opinion held by very many Jewish teachers and some of the fathers." The famous Diddlemeyer has this to say, "Universalism in the 4th century drove its roots down deeply alike in the East and the West and had very many defenders." Roos writes, "The doctrine of a general restoration of all rational creatures has been recommended by very many of the greatest thinkers of the ancient church and of modern times." A lot of people don't realize that many scholars today, Karl Barth, William Barclay, Westcott, and many other excellent scholars believe in the restoration of all things, apokatastasis. They don't believe in hell. The famous world-renowned Neander has this to say, "From two theological schools there went forth an opposition to the doctrine of everlasting punishment." The Encyclopedia of Religious Knowledge by Schaff and Herzog in 1908, in the 12th volume on page 96, we find this. "In the first 5 or 6 centuries of Christianity, there were 6 theological schools, of which 4, Alexandria, Antioch, Caesarea, and Edessa, were Universalists. 1, Ephesus, accepted conditional mortality. 1, Carthage or Rome taught endless punishment of the wicked. Other theological schools are mentioned as founded by Universalists, but their actual doctrine on this subject was not known. And Dr. Jerry Walls, who is a professor who has been in seminary and teaches in a seminary, informs us that the church has taught hell from the beginning to the end. Here are church historians, Orthodox church historians, who would beg to differ with Dr. Jerry Walls. I'd like to mention a few of the early church fathers and what they had to say about the general consensus of the opinion of teaching in the first few centuries. So we've heard it from present-day historians. Let's hear some of the church leaders in the early church and what they said was the teaching of their time. St. Basil, writing in the 4th century, has this to say: "The mass of men, that is Christians, say that there is to be an end of punishment to those who are punished." St. Jerome: "I know that most persons understand by the story of Nineveh and its king the ultimate forgiveness of the devil and all rational beings." Augustine, who was the one who basically perpetuated and injected the doctrine of endless punishment into the church and I believe, plunged the church into the Dark Ages by his teaching. He had this to say about those who believed in universal salvation: "There are very many," in the Latin it's imo quam plurimi, which can also be translated majority, who though not denying the Holy Scriptures, do not believe in endless torments." This is out of the mouth of the one who injected eternal torment and basically insisted that the church teach eternal torment. Out of his own words, he acknowledges that in his day, in the 4th century, the majority of Christians and the majority of church fathers and church leaders and pastors taught universal salvation.